It sounds like the greatest business idea in the world. You buy a piece of land, you install some slides, you fill the pools with water, you charge people admission, and then you sit back while families line up in the summer heat, handing you money to cool off. Simple, seasonal, fun, and on the surface, it almost looks foolproof. Because who doesn't want to go to a water park? But here's the thing. Water parks have one of the most brutal economic profiles of any entertainment business on the planet. They require enormous capital to build. They operate for sometimes fewer than 100 days a year. They are subject to weather in a way that almost no other business is. And they carry a liability exposure that makes insurance companies genuinely nervous. The margins, when you actually break them down, are razor thin for most operators. And yet, somehow, the water park industry generates somewhere between $18 and $22 billion globally every year, with the United States alone accounting for roughly a quarter of that. So the business clearly works for someone. The question is, who and why and how? To understand any of that, you first have to understand what a water park actually costs to build. And this is where most people's intuitions fall apart completely. When people imagine building a water park, they tend to picture a neighborhood splash pad or a modest local attraction with a few slides and a lazy river. And those do exist. A small regional water park, maybe 15 to 20 acres, might cost anywhere from $10 to $30 million to build from the ground up. That sounds like a lot until you realize that a mid-sized regional park with real infrastructure, multiple major attractions, a wave pool, a serious lazy river, family raft rides, and food service facilities will typically run $50 to $150 million. And a full-scale destination resort water park? We're talking $200 million to over $1 billion by the time you add hotels, parking structures, and theming. American Dream in New Jersey, which opened its water park component in 2020, reportedly cost somewhere around $5 billion for the entire complex, though the water park section specifically represents a fraction of that. Schlitterbahn in Texas, one of the more famous independent water park brands, built its original New Braunfels location over decades, constantly reinvesting rather than making one enormous upfront bet. And that actually tells you something important about how water park economics work. The operators who survive are the ones who understand that this is not a build it and forget it business. The construction costs themselves break down in ways most people wouldn't expect. The land, obviously, is the first major expense, and location matters enormously. You need somewhere within reasonable driving distance of a large population center, ideally within an hour to 2 hours for day trippers, but you also need enough land to build on affordably, which usually means suburban or semi-rural locations. Then there are the rides themselves. A single major water slide, fully designed, engineered, manufactured, and installed, can cost between $1 and $5 million depending on complexity. A wave pool can run $3 to $8 million. A lazy river, which looks deceptively simple, requires significant civil engineering and can cost $2 to $6 million depending on size and theming. And that's before you factor in the mechanical systems, the pumps, the filtration systems, the chemical treatment infrastructure, the electrical systems, the waterproofing. Water parks are essentially giant plumbing projects wrapped in a theme. Here's where it gets interesting. The equipment in a water park isn't like the equipment in a restaurant or a retail store. It exists in a uniquely hostile environment. Water, sun, chlorine, and constant mechanical stress combine to degrade infrastructure at an accelerated rate. A major ride might have a useful operational life of 15 to 25 years if properly maintained, but maintenance is anything but cheap. Industry estimates suggest that mature water parks spend between 5 and 10% of their total asset value on maintenance and capital improvement every single year just to stay competitive and safe. For a park with $100 million in physical assets, That's $5 to $10 million annually going out the door before you've paid a single employee. And speaking of employees, the staffing economics of a water park are genuinely strange compared to almost any other type of business. Water parks are, by necessity, heavily staffed. You need lifeguards, and lots of them. The staffing ratios required by most state regulations mandate one lifeguard per specific number of swimmers in a given zone. And in a busy park on a hot July afternoon, that number of bodies in the water climbs fast. A mid-sized water park might employ 300 to 500 people during its peak season. The problem is that almost none of them are full-time, year-round employees. The vast majority are seasonal workers, often teenagers and college students, earning hourly wages that in today's labor market typically range from $12 to $18 an hour, depending on the state and the role. This creates a compounding challenge because turnover is extraordinarily high in seasonal employment. Parks have to rehire and retrain a largely fresh workforce every single year. Lifeguard certification isn't optional. It requires formal training, testing, and ongoing in-season drills. For a large park, the cost of that annual training cycle can run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars when you account for instructor time, certification fees, and the simple inefficiency of getting inexperienced people up to standard before opening day. And if you've ever been to a water park in the first 2 weeks of the season versus the last 2 weeks before school starts, you can see the difference in operational polish that comes from staff who've been doing it for 3 months versus 3 days. The labor problem also intersects with something that water park operators don't love talking about publicly, which is the fundamental tension between safety and throughput. Longer lines mean more impatient guests. More impatient guests create pressure to move people through attractions faster, but faster doesn't always mean safer, and when something goes wrong at a water park, the consequences are severe in every possible direction. Liability is the silent tax on this entire industry. The water park industry has had some genuinely tragic accidents over the years. The Verricht slide at Schlitterbahn, Kansas City, which was at one point marketed as the tallest water slide in the world, was the site of a fatal accident in 2016 that ultimately led to criminal charges against park executives, a massive civil settlement, and the eventual closure of that entire park. The ripple effects of that single incident reshaped how regulators across multiple states approached water slide inspection and certification. Most water parks carry general liability insurance in the range of $50 to $100 million in coverage, and the premiums on that coverage are not trivial, depending on the park's size, claims history, and the types of attractions it operates. Annual liability premiums can range from $500,000 to several $1,000,000 per year, and that's just one line of insurance. Parks also carry property insurance, workers' compensation coverage, and in many cases specialized equipment breakdown insurance, because if the wave pool pump fails on the 4th of July weekend, the financial cost of a park closure, even for a single day, can be devastating. Now comes the part nobody talks about. The regulatory environment for water parks is remarkably fragmented in the United States. Unlike commercial aviation, where federal oversight is largely uniform, water park regulation is handled almost entirely at the state level, and the consistency between states is startling in both directions. Some states have rigorous, well-funded inspection regimes with dedicated amusement ride safety divisions. Others have historically had very little formal oversight at all. This patchwork creates genuine operational complexity for regional operators who run parks in multiple states, because compliance isn't one standard. It's a different standard in every jurisdiction. All of those costs lead back to one central question: how does a water park actually make money, and is the model even sustainable? The revenue side of the water park business has more layers than most people realize. Admission is the obvious one, and for most parks it's the largest single revenue stream, but it's rarely more than about 50 to 60% of total revenue. A mid-tier regional water park might charge somewhere between $30 and $60 for a general adult admission ticket on the gate, with discounts available online in advance, through hotel partnerships, or through annual passes. Season passes are particularly interesting from a financial standpoint because they represent guaranteed upfront cash, typically collected in the spring before the park has spent $1 on a single customer's experience. A family of 4 might pay $300 for season passes that would cost them $600 or $700 in individual admissions. The park takes a haircut on per-visit revenue, but it locks in cash, and, more importantly, it locks in loyalty. Here's the thing about season pass holders, though. They tend to visit more frequently, which means they spend more on food, merchandise, and premium experiences even though they're not paying admission. Which brings us to the part of water park economics that is, in many ways, the whole game: food and beverage. The margins on food and beverage inside a water park are extraordinary. A bottle of water that costs the park 30 cents will sell for $4 or $5. A basket of fries with a gross ingredient cost of under $1 will sell for 10 or 12. Captive audience economics are ruthlessly efficient, because once you're inside the park, you've agreed to the deal. You can't leave to get lunch somewhere else without paying again to get back in, or in many parks, without losing your parking spot. The food and beverage operation at a successful water park can account for 25 to 35% of total revenue, and it does so at margins that a standalone restaurant would envy. Then there are the secondary and tertiary revenue layers: cabana rentals, which are essentially shaded lounge areas with seating and sometimes private service, can run anywhere from $100 to $600 a day depending on the park and the level of service included. Locker rentals, tube rentals, sunscreen dispensers, arcade games, photography packages, premium fast pass systems that let guests skip lines, and birthday party packages all layer additional revenue onto the base admission model. A well-run, mid-sized water park targeting 500,000 visitors per season can realistically generate $30 to $50 million in total annual revenue across all these channels. But here's the problem. Getting to 500,000 visitors requires something that no business can completely control. Weather is the existential variable in water park economics, and it operates on a timeline that is brutally compressed. The average outdoor water park in the continental United States operates for somewhere between 90 and 130 days per year. That's the entire window in which it must generate all of its revenue to cover 12 months of debt service, maintenance, insurance, administrative overhead, and off-season capital investment. A park in Florida or Texas might stretch that window to 150 or even 200 days. A park in the upper Midwest might only have a reliable window of 80 to 90 days. And within that window, a cold, rainy summer can cut visitation by 20 or 30% compared to a hot, sunny one. Think about what that means financially. If a park is projecting $40 million in revenue for the season based on historical averages, a cool, wet June and July, which is entirely plausible and happens regularly, could mean $8 to $12 million of projected revenue simply doesn't materialize. The fixed costs don't move. The debt service doesn't move. The insurance premiums don't move. The maintenance costs don't move. But the revenue does. And it does so in response to a variable that no operator can influence, predict with precision, or hedge against in any simple way. Some parks have experimented with weather insurance products that compensate them for revenue losses tied to measured rainfall or temperature deviations from historical norms. But these products are complex, often expensive, and don't always correlate well enough to actual attendance to make them a reliable hedge. The more common strategy is to simply run lean, maintain a significant cash reserve coming into each season, and build your financial model around conservative attendance assumptions rather than optimistic ones. This is why the economics of water parks favor scale so dramatically. The largest operators in this industry are not individuals who bought a nice piece of land and installed some slides. They are institutional-grade businesses with the financial architecture to absorb the volatility that destroys smaller operators. Six Flags, Cedar Fair, and Palace Entertainment collectively operated dozens of water parks across the United States, and their scale gives them structural advantages that a single park independent operator simply cannot replicate. They can negotiate national supplier contracts for everything from chlorine to food products to merchandise. They can centralize marketing spend. They can shift capital between parks in a single season if one park is outperforming and another is struggling. They can access capital markets to finance major new attractions at costs that a small operator can't touch. And importantly, they can build the indoor water park model, which is one of the most interesting recent developments in this industry. Indoor water parks, exemplified most famously by Great Wolf Lodge, effectively solved the seasonality problem. Great Wolf operates year-round in markets like Grapevine, Texas, and Niagara Falls, Ontario, pairing the water park with a hotel that creates a captive overnight guest population. The economics are different from an outdoor park in almost every dimension. Occupancy rates, hotel revenue per available room, food and beverage spend per guest, and length of stay all become the key metrics rather than daily admission counts and seasonal weather patterns. Great Wolf's model is interesting because the water park essentially functions as an amenity that drives hotel bookings, and the hotel revenue, which is more predictable and year-round, provides a financial base that pure outdoor parks don't have. The company has reportedly generated revenues exceeding $500 million annually across its properties. It was acquired by private equity firm Blackstone in 2012 for roughly $800 million, which tells you something about how seriously institutional capital takes the indoor water park model when it's executed well. And this is where everything changes when you look at who's actually investing in water parks today. The ownership structure of the water park industry has shifted significantly over the past 2 decades. Private equity has become a dominant force. Regional parks that were once family-owned for generations have been consolidated into larger portfolios. The logic is straightforward: a fragmented industry with recurring revenue, significant barriers to entry, real asset value in the form of land and infrastructure, and brand loyalty that makes customers genuinely resistant to substitutes is exactly the kind of business that private equity firms like to roll up. But private equity ownership also introduces its own set of complications. The pressure to generate returns within a specific investment horizon, typically 5 to 7 years, can conflict with the long-term capital investment that water parks genuinely require to stay competitive. A park that skips a major new attraction investment for 2 or 3 years while its private equity owner maximizes EBITDA looks great on paper right up until the point where guests start choosing the park down the road that did invest. And then attendance declines, revenue declines, and the financial engineering that looked so clever starts to unwind. This tension is real and observable in the industry. Parks that have been starved of capital investment over the medium term reliably show attendance erosion within a few years. And because water park guests are, in many ways, comparison shoppers, the competitive dynamic in any given regional market is surprisingly fierce. Families have options, and they talk to each other, and a reputation for outdated rides or poor maintenance spreads faster today than it ever did before social media existed. The future of the water park business, honestly, is a story about 2 very different industries that happen to share a name. There are the large-scale, well-capitalized destination parks and indoor resort properties that are genuinely thriving and attracting institutional investment. And then there are the smaller, independent, single-location outdoor parks that are under enormous pressure from every direction simultaneously. Rising labor costs, aging infrastructure, insurance cost increases, weather volatility, and competition from both other water parks and from a much wider entertainment landscape that now includes streaming, gaming, and every other form of entertainment competing for discretionary leisure spending. The smaller parks that survive tend to be the ones with something irreplaceable about their situation, whether that's a location so well positioned that no competitor can match it, a brand so deeply embedded in regional culture that guests genuinely feel emotional loyalty to it, or an ownership structure that doesn't require the kind of financial returns that would pressure the park into underinvestment. And there's a genuinely interesting climate dimension emerging in this industry that isn't discussed enough. As summer temperatures in many parts of the country increase, the length of viable outdoor water park seasons in southern and southwestern markets is actually extending. Phoenix, Las Vegas, and parts of Florida and Texas are seeing demand patterns shift in ways that benefit outdoor water parks. Simultaneously, in those same hot regions, intense heat events are creating operational challenges. Because there are temperatures at which standing on exposed concrete in direct sun is simply too dangerous for guests, and parks have to weigh attendance against conditions. Water parks are, in a strange way, both a beneficiary of a warming climate in some markets and a potential casualty of extreme weather volatility in others. And the industry hasn't fully worked out how to model that yet. So here's where we end up. Owning a water park is not, as it turns out, the passive dream business that it looks like from the outside. It is a capital-intensive, operationally complex, seasonally constrained, heavily regulated, weather-dependent enterprise that rewards scale, discipline, and patient long-term thinking, and punishes shortcuts at almost every turn. The parks that work, the ones that fill up on hot weekends and make families come back year after year, are the ones where every single decision, from the water chemistry management to the food vendor contracts to the new attraction investment cycle, is being made by people who understand exactly how fragile the economics actually are. Because the window to make money is short, the fixed costs are massive, and the margin for error is smaller than the slide you're trying to sell tickets to ride. And yet, on a perfect summer day, when the park is full and the kids are screaming down the slides and the lazy river is drifting along and someone is biting into an overpriced basket of fries and absolutely not caring about the markup, it's hard not to see why people keep building these things. There's something about the business of selling summer that makes people believe it will work for them, even when the numbers say it's harder than it looks. The numbers are always harder than they look.